False Start, college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host, John Buhler, lead writer, fansided.com. As you can see, I'm joined by absolutely nobody. Cody Williams, content director, fansided.com. He's making moves. Namely, he and his wife are moving to their first house. Got kind of delayed a little bit with some weather there in Santa Fe, New Mexico this time of year. You're up in elevation. God bless. He'll be back in the program hopefully on Thursday. But got a packed show here for episode 155, and we're just going to get right off the bat from the start here with our first and 15 with he coming. Yes, Eddie George, Tennessee Titans and Ohio State legend, head coach at Tennessee State, is leaving his FCS school, his HBU school, to take over for Scott Loeffler at Bowling Green. This is massive. Look, when Scott Loeffler left, yeah, that's kind of a pun or whatever it is, but like when he decided to go to the NFL to be the quarterbacks coach for the Eagles, he's effectively replacing Doug Nussmeier, who's going to the Saints to follow Kellen Moore again, this time to be the OC with the Saints. Kellen Moore's first gig as NFL head coach. So obviously you see what happens is like these coaching cycles continue. Like we're almost at spring practice. I mean, Eddie George got hired like at the end of the first week of March, like over the weekend and everything like that. Spring practice is coming up. Obviously, Bowling Green does not compete at the Power Four level, but this is traditionally one of the better resource programs there in the Mac. And I think anytime you make a move like this that gives a program like Bowling Green strength, comparable to what we see out of Toledo almost always, usually out of Miami, Ohio, maybe Ohio U in recent years, this is great for that league and that program. As I really try to unpack this a little bit, Eddie George is a guy, he won the Heisman Trophy with the Buckeyes back in 95. Won MVP, took the Titans to the Super Bowl, probably one of the greatest players in Titans history. Initially drafted by the Dead in the Water franchise, that was the Houston Oilers. They eventually became the Titans in the late 90s. And then I think he finished his career with the Cowboys. But Eddie George is a very well-versed man. He's done acting. He's got an MBA from Northwestern. So very well-educated, very comfortable in his own skin type of guy. He was named the head coach of the Tennessee State Tigers without any head coaching experience. I think he got a share of the Ohio Valley Conference and the Big South this past year. Took him to the FCS playoffs. They lost to traditional power there, Montana. I mean, that happens. People lose to the Grizzlies all the time. So I guess I'll unpack it from Loeffler's point, and then I'll unpack it from George's point here in a second. I think with Loeffler, it's like what you have to remember about Bowling Green is this is a place where coaches could really to look for the back lack of a better word, like it's a place where if you're an up and coming head coach and you succeed there, it's gonna resonate with people at much higher levels. You got to remember, this was Urban Meyer's first head coaching gig. This was Dino Babers' first head coaching gig. Dave Clawson's first at the, I think Clawson and Dino Babers, this was their first at the FBS level. We obviously went on to see Urban Meyer have tremendous success at Utah, Florida, and Ohio State, not Jacksonville. Hell no, Jacksonville. We also saw Dave Clawson have tremendous success at Wake Forest. He recently retired, resigned, whatever it is, moved to a different role within the Wake Forest athletic department. And even though Dino Babers, we kind of make fun of him on the show a little bit with the Dino Babers dead cat bounce. He had quite a bit of success there at Syracuse. Obviously, Fran Brown seems to be better equipped for that job, but that may be a rough year for the Orange. We'll talk about that more in a minute. As far as what it means for Loeffler, it's like he's got to fill up. He's dealing with the fact that he's coaching at a place that produced those three guys. And I believe if I look at this, I think it's from an article from ESPN over the weekend. I think Loeffler was something like 27 and 41. Wow, I got that right on the nose over 6 seasons. And he had made bowl games the last 3 years. It was probably a rough start for him initially, but 6 years in, you're at one of the better run programs in the back, and you're still not close to being, above 500. You look across that league. Pete Limbo kind of knows what he's doing there at Buffalo. That looks like that's going to sustain. And then we'll see what happens. In Eastern Michigan still being relevant under Chris Creighton and everything like that. We'll see what happens with the change of the helm there in Central Michigan, Western Michigan. Lance Taylor seems to finally get that thing in the right direction, but like league's leveled up, so you're dealing with high quality coaches across the board here. Maybe not Kenny Burns there at Kent State, but that's neither here nor there. But the opportunity to go to the NFL has become very commonplace here in college football. Around this time last year, we saw Boston College head coach Jeff Hafley leave to go be the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. I know there's other ones out there too as well, but like, Todd Monken left the Georgia Bulldogs OC job to be the OC for the Baltimore Ravens. There have been others as well, but like these jobs are getting more and more difficult, and you got to have a guy who brings something different to the table. You got to have a guy who comes in here that wants to be here, that I think can recruit in a way that Leffler couldn't, and Eddie George seems to be that. Moving on to him, this may be somewhat of another like celebrity football star hire. This is the same sort of ilk as like we've seen with Deion Sanders at Colorado, Trent Dilfer at UAB. This past offseason, we've seen I believe it was Michael Vick is taking over at Norfolk State, I believe, and I believe that yeah, Deshaun Jackson is at Delaware State. So we've got guys going to the HBCU, we have guys coming up and everything like that. But I think more importantly, as long as these coaches are about the kids and about development and not really overly worried about like the glitz and glamour of it all, then I think that's great. In a way, I think Eddie George is about that. I mean, outside of that 1 year with the Cowboys, I mean, how much glitz and glamour has he really dealt with since leaving Ohio State? Maybe the Titans when they're brand new in Nashville, but that's not a well-run organization. Bud Adams did what he did there, and his daughter is definitely his daughter. Is still doing God knows what there in Nashville. But like what I look at it from Eddie George going to Bowling Green, you're going to be able to at least get a visit for some guy who's, on the fence. He's like, okay, I go to Cincinnati and maybe be on the bench and play for Scott Satterfield. Or, maybe I go to Bowling Green, start, and maybe into the transfer portal at some point. I know that Harold Fannin Jr. was a star tight end under Scott Leffler this past year. Maybe you continue to develop in that regard, and you get to put more guys, bigger names there in the NFL. But again, a guy whose name carries weight, not just in Ohio, but nationally and in Tennessee. I mean, that's if you really just want to recruit those two states. I mean, obviously, you're gonna have to probably recruit Georgia. You're gonna have to probably recruit Michigan, Pennsylvania, et cetera, Kentucky, whatever is in and around Bowling Green, Bowling Green, Ohio, not Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where Bowling Green or Western Kentucky is. But the point is, this is a big hire for Bowling Green because it gets them back on the map. I feel not necessarily they lost their way, but like we know what the standard is for them. This is contending for MAC championships, and there's been other teams that have been doing it a little more frequently. Obviously, my pick this year to make the playoff out of the group of five is a MAC school in Miami, Ohio. That's because I really like Chuck Martin as head coach, and I think DeQuan Finn going back to the league he used to dominate with at Toledo, now playing for Miami, Ohio. I think that's huge. So I also think the fact that like the Mountain West, we'll see what happens with Boise State. We'll see what happens further along the line with other positions and other. Trying to think what the word is here, but yeah, I'm just Bones doing stupid stuff again. It always does. They got the timer and everything on there as well, but I think with this is a move that puts Bowling Green on the same level as the schools it should be competing with. And it will take time. There will be a transitional period. We saw, Deion Sanders struggle his first year at Colorado after having such tremendous success at Jackson State. Trent Dilfer has not had a lot of success since leaving Lipscomb Academy in Nashville with UAB. Maybe the Blazers will finally ball. And these things again, these things take time. But I think with Eddie George putting in the hard work there at Tennessee State, just after the end of COVID, I mean that goes to show that like he's able to take a program that was really struggling, that's had a lot of success in the past and turn it around. I'm quite bullish on this. I'm very intrigued to see what he can do there in Bowling Green. I think it's a 5-year deal. I don't know if he's going to be there for 5 years. If he has tremendous success in three, then I think somebody at the P4 level is going to hire him. I just have no idea who that's going to be, but we got to give this time. We got to see this through. But I'm very excited for Eddie George, one of the most exciting players from my childhood. Gets a huge opportunity to coach up young men in college football at the Group of 5 level. I think that's fantastic. Moving on to our next topic here, we're going to be debuting a new segment or rebranding it, if you will. This would be from Ward Manuel's manual, but we have a new chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee. That would be Baylor Athletic Director Mack Rhoades. So, you know, every Rhoades has its tournament. Yeah, I ran that by Cody. We'll see what he says, but yeah, it's Mack Rhoades now. So he replaces Ward Manuel in this role. This is Ward Manuel was only the committee chair for 1 year in 24. And then in 23 and 22, we had Boo Corrigan. You know, that's where falling out of Boo Corrigan's apple tree came from for our first year of the show, the athletic director at North Carolina State. Mack Rhoades has been, I think this is his second of 3 years in the rotation of being, you know, a college football playoff like selection committee. And again, what you have to remember is he's being the mouthpiece for a committee that doesn't have like a voice. Like anytime you see anybody go on there and you see Chris Fowler or namely Reese Davis or Joey Galloway grilling him, whomever that is, like he's trying to explain a decision that like the collective made, not necessarily him. So he's got to defend things that maybe he doesn't always agree with. And it puts him in a very weird spot. But I will say though, it's become less of that with a 12 team playoff versus a four. The other thing that I think is important here, well, I guess there's two other things that are really important with it being Mack Rhoades now. The first is I think the fact that he is at a Big 12 school, a private school, that matters quite a lot because maybe I'm wrong here, but a lot of the guys who have been the AD or the selection committee chairman have been head coaches at a lot of them have been at Power Two schools, the Big Ten, the SEC, but a lot of them have been at public schools. So, you know, Ward Manuel at Michigan, uh, Boo Corrigan in North Carolina State, Kirby Hocutt back in the day at Texas Tech, Jeff Long, the first guy out of Arkansas. I think Rob Mullins did again, maybe. I think, but Oregon. We'll talk about Rob Mullins here in a little bit as well. Gary Barta, Iowa. So they're looking for like a different, unique flavor. And I think it's also interesting that like the last three guys that we've had represent teams that are going to be on the fringe of potentially getting in. I mean, anybody who thought Michigan was going to repeat last year's national championships is a moron, almost swore there. You and I both knew that the regression from Jim Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore was going to be substantial, but that's how it goes sometimes. I would also say that like Michigan did not have the season it thought it would. Towards the end, maybe it was pushing towards the top 25, not really. But you know, NC State a couple of years there under Brew Corrigan was kind of there, and that's kind of where we think Baylor is going to be. Dave Aranda had a really great year last year. Made the right decision at quarterback, eventually going to Sawyer Robertson over to Quan Finn. You know that's also the same team that like moved on from Blake Shapen, went to Mississippi State. We'll see what happens down there with Jeff Lebby and his program, but I do think that there's going to be some interesting wrinkles that are going to be a result of Mack Rhoades being in this role. We'll see how diplomatic he is. Obviously, I think outside of Jeff Long, I think anybody who's doing this, like this can't be their first year being part of the selection committee. Like they got to see how it works. They have to have a whole, you know, season's worth of experience of saying, you know, the machinations of everything that goes on in that room because God forbid you got to go up there and explain it without necessarily having any experience doing it. I think the fact that Mack Rhoades has 1 year doing this already, that's huge, particularly with it being in the 12 team playoff. I think that that's, you know, that's not untrodden territory. I think he's going to look a little more sharper up there than maybe Ward Manuel did, who I think did a good job. But I think he also was representing a program that a lot of people hated because of what all went down in 2023 with the Wolverines. Baylor has been hated not that long ago. I mean, they were one of the teams that was on the fence of making it in at the first playoff back in 14. Them and TCU were on the outside look again because they didn't have a conference championship game. That was the peak of the Art Briles era. We saw how quickly that unraveled. Matt Rhule took over. Then I think it's with Dave Aranda now. We've seen all three of them win Big 12 championships. We know what it's capable of at Baylor. It may be like every couple of years you can do it, not every single year, but the new Big 12 is wide open. Maybe Baylor can take advantage of that power void at the top. So I guess really to tie a bow on it with Mack Rhoades getting this role, we may see a little bit more nuanced discussion just because he's going to be asked questions based on where he is as an athletic director. I think if you've got an athletic director representing a Power Two school at the top, ESPN is going to basically grill him about the SEC and the Big Ten. That's just the nature of the beast. But I think if you have multiple teams in the Big 12, like I think this year Iowa State and Arizona State are both going to make it. Well, you got to explain like, well, why is the team that's not going to win the Big 12 still going to make it in over the eighth or ninth best team out of the Big 10 and the SEC combined? It's the same sort of thing with the ACC. I think Clemson's going to be really good. So maybe Mack Rhoades will be able to give excuse me, a little more credence, a little bit more depth in the conversation, to defend the SMUs of the world, the Texas Techs of the world, the Baylors of the world. Basically anybody who is going to be worse than Illinois or Indiana, like whoever is like that really strong senior-laden team out of the SEC, probably the Big Ten, that's going to make it in. Who is it going to be that is going to break this bracket? SMU kind of did it. Indiana most certainly did. But I think this will give a bit more nuance to whoever comes in 9, 10, 11. It'll also be interesting to see whoever emerges out of the group of five, if that team's going to be as good as what Boise State was. I think we're going to forget about this in time, but like that team got a first round bye, which means like they were not like 12, like they were several spots up. If we would have done it based on seeding, Clemson would have been like was the last team in, and they were the 12 seed, and they would have played the fifth best team in the country, I think, at that point, which would have been Penn State or Texas. And that's would have been the first round game. We'll see what happens with the seeding and everything like that. But having a guy who's going to be on both sides, be in the room and then be on camera in the 12-team playoff, I think that's going to be a good thing. And I think this is a victory for private schools out there, for smaller schools, for the ACC and the Big 12, because Lord knows that they need it in the era of the SEC and the Big 10, namely ESPN and Fox. And that's what they say sometimes. They say, where's the money, Lebowski? Yes, moving on to our third topic. Dan Lanning got a massive extension from Oregon here. Make sure I got this right. So he has agreed to a deal that would keep him under contract with the Ducks through 2030. He's looking at making nearly 11 million annually under this new contract. They're also getting extensions for defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy and Will Stein that will run through the 27 season. Athletic director Rob Mullins, just skimming through this here from the AP, really likes just loves having this guy as his head coach and everything like that. Dan Lanning is very grateful of the opportunity. I think now the other thing that the AP put out there that was very interesting for the most part is Lanning has crossed that threshold of, I think he's now one of the top 10 highest paid coaches. I think last year, 7 head coaches, they said, had an average had a salary above 10 million last year, with Kirby Smart having the most at 13.28. So Dan Lanning is being paid like a top 10 head coach, and he probably is. But this all signifies 3 things to me. Number one, it's going to be very difficult for somebody to buy out Will Stein to potentially be their next head coach. Like if it hits the fan there at Virginia Tech or Virginia, because he's not going to take over as the head coach at Louisville because Jeff Brom's so good. I mean, that's Will Stein's alma mater, but like whoever is going to want to get Will Stein's going to have to pay a premium. We have to understand the fact that he's probably going to leave at some point. But this is Rob Mullins. This is the University of Oregon's athletic department trying to safeguard to make sure that Dan Lanning's not going to lose his guys. As far as Tosh Lupoy is concerned, like defense has got to be better, man. I know he's been around a bunch. I know he's been at Alabama, Falcons, Jaguars, just all over the place. And this is really where it comes down to with Oregon. I'm going to be hypercritical of the Ducks until they prove me otherwise. Last year was their year that they needed to win a national title. They didn't do it. They were undefeated heading into the playoff. They had the number one seed. Yes, they got a tough matchup having to play the winner of the 8-9 game between Ohio State and Tennessee. Well, they got crushed by the Buckeyes in a rematch. You look soft again. You always do. This is just something that's happened with Oregon for my entire life, pretty much. Prior to me, prior to Mike Bellotti taking over in the mid 90s, this program was not a blue blood. If they need to earn their spot there, because they're not, they have to win national titles. Do I think Dan Lanning is going to win a national title between now and 2030? I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I think he's dead set on, being in Eugene for the duration. I mean, he's got kids who are what, preteens, teenagers, something like that. Maybe they get the opportunity to grow up and live in one place and not have to move around so much. Maybe his wife doesn't want him to have another logo tattooed on her, like an name image like this on his ribs. Unless it's Dallas Cowboys star and she looked like Paul Stanley from Kiss. That would be hilarious. But I want to rock and roll a night party every day. I just want to see Dan Lanning take over. Like I want to see him, like it seems like he's like their cousin or like their cool uncle or something. I want to see him go out there. I want to see Oregon play like they did versus Colorado 2 years ago, where they just stepped on their heads and slit their throat, and they just kicked the sorry living crap out of Colorado. And it basically told Deion Sanders and his buffs like, yeah, the Pac-12 is different. Yeah, get ready for this, man. If Oregon can be that, and I think that what we've seen out of the Ducks, that leads me to believe that it could, is I think that they traveled pretty well. They had to play a lot of games there in what Eastern and Central time, despite being on the West Coast. They handled it much better than USC, who was terrible. UCLA had a low floor. I think their style of ball being the West Coast version of Wisconsin is going to work. Washington had a lot of roster turnover there under Jed Fish, but I think they eventually kind of figured it out there. We'll see what happens with the Huskies. So I think playing in the Big Ten, even now with the new quarterback, whatever it is, Oregon's going to be fine. I have them as a borderline playoff lock, just behind Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas out of the SEC. They're in that same group of like the Georgias, the Notre Dames, Clemson. Clemson's probably the higher end of that, and then Tennessee's on the lower end of that. But I'm looking at Oregon, and I'm like, they can win 10 or 11 games next year. We'll see what happens with Dante Moore at quarterback. But basically, Rob Mullins is saying, like, hey, this is our guy. This is the guy who's going to take us to the promised land. And right now, like, with this contract extension, it's going to be really expensive for somebody like, I don't know, Georgia or Alabama to ever buy him out. Those are probably the only two places I think he would actually leave Oregon for if it opened up. He had such tremendous success on Kirby Smart's staff there in Athens, and he cut his teeth there with Nick Saban there at Alabama. But obviously, that requires you replacing a legend, Kirby Smart, and your mentor, and then you got to replace the guy who replaced the legend with DeBoer and Saban. But I think Oregon is showing that like it doesn't matter that they're not in a talent-rich state in terms of recruiting high school products. I mean, this is a state that has 3 million people. Most of them live in and around Portland, up on the border with Washington. I think the other big thing you have to remember is, yeah, you have the Phil Knight money, but he's not getting any younger. We'll see what happens there with the investment in the program. But Oregon emphasizes athletics considerably. Yes, it's I think what the word is, an AAU university. That's why they were able to go to the Big Ten. Academics are a really big thing, but also Marcus Mariota went there and he's an idiot. So that does nothing for me. The other thing that is really important in understanding Dan Lanning's new contract is the bar's been raised. He's entering year 4 in this role. And we need to start seeing him making the playoff every year, and we need to see him to start winning playoff games. Maybe it's not in Oregon's cards to win a national title. Maybe just there's a limit to what it is. Maybe Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich took it to where it was going to go. Chip Kelly may have had the better team, but in 2010, but Auburn had Cam Newton and Nick Fairley. So good luck with that. 2014, or yeah, you go in there, you have Marcus Mariota, you beat FSU. Then you run into Ohio State, which is just, again, a more talent-rich program than you. You had sensational sophomores like Ezekiel Elliott and Joey Bosa, and you ran into honestly a better head coach there in Urban Meyer. That's what it's like. If we're getting to that point with Oregon, then I'm pleased. Then I can understand like, okay, maybe I've been too critical of them. But like we don't need to put them on the same level as Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. They haven't earned it yet. But they're not even on the same level as Clemson. They have to earn it there. But with this contract, with this money, with this length, with the coordinators coming back, just recruit, man, and win. Just do it. Just figure it out. I want to see him win. I want to see Dan Lanning do it because well, he's a likable guy. He did great things here at Georgia. I think everybody here in Athens and Atlanta area, I think is very highly of him. But I don't think we need to make exceptions for Oregon anymore. We don't need to move the goalpost up to them. We need to make them cross the goal line on their own. And even if we keep giving them like, first and 10 from the 1 yard line, like first and goal from the one, they eventually got to punch an in. And clearly Rob Mullins, they're paying him to do that. And I believe that they can. I just, like this way, if Dan Lanning cannot win a national title at Oregon, no one ever will. But I'm pretty bullish on them potentially being able to do it. And in all honesty, I think it's going to be singular. I think the other thing is they got to get a little more mentally tough. We don't need people like Tez Johnson saying nonsense at the combine. We don't need people like Kayvon Thibodeau saying dumb stuff on camera while the national championship's going on. We need guys who are going to be there, who are ready for the NFL, who this isn't their first rodeo. This is Oregon, and it may have been their first rodeo because again, we anointed them like, oh, they're on the same level as everybody else. Haven't made the playoff in a decade. So now that you have, and you've gotten some taste of it, and you had your ass kicked, let's just put in the work. And I would not be shocked if Oregon won a national title next year. I would say of the 8 teams that could do it, they're probably 7 or 8, but they compete in recruitment and they compete on the field at a level that puts them in a position in this new format where that's possible. So that's really all I got to say about Dan Lanning. I'm not going to say anything else. Just like I think that congratulations to him, congratulations to his family, congratulations to Oregon, congratulations to Tosh Leopold, congratulations to Will Stein, Rob Mullins. This is great. This is a contract extension and raises that were merited, unlike whatever the hell is going on in Wisconsin or God forbid what happened last year with Oklahoma. But we're going on to our fourth topic, and we've got this is the fourth one, and we're going to do some 4-4-4. Yes, we're moving on to our fourth topic with some 4-4-4. ESPN's Bill Connelly did the hard work for me, so I didn't have to. But he went out there and he did his SP Plus rankings, which accounts for recent success, recent recruiting, and returning rosters. He also used the next wrinkle in it was strength of schedule, and he comes up with this model essentially by saying, what would an average top 5 team in the country, how well would they perform with the team's schedule? And I know that sounds really arbitrary, but maybe this is the closest thing to like, with it being free agency this week in the NFL, maybe this is kind of like, the franchise tag. So he went through and he ranked, every team's strength of schedule. And I'm going to pull this up here. There's going to be 2 parts to this conversation. So I wrote about this for fansided.com a couple of times this late last week. There's the top 40 he has put out here in a tweet, and your hardest schedule in the country, your 2 hardest are Oklahoma and Florida, where they are projected to go win 77.1% of their games. Oklahoma is projected to go with its roster to win 6.3 games, whereas Florida is projected to win 6.6. And then down at 40 is Illinois, where an average top 5 team would win 89.1% of their games, and Illinois is projected to win 8.2 games with its schedule. So when I was looking at this, there were only SEC, Big Ten, and ACC teams in the top 40. You've got all 16 teams from the SEC. You've got 17 of 18 of the Big Ten. I think the only one who's outside of it is Maryland. Then you got about, I think, 7 teams from the from the ACC, and I can just kind of rattle it down here. You've got Syracuse, you've got Florida State, Stanford, Clemson, Miami, NC State. I might be missing one, but that's essentially the teams in the ACC who have tough schedules. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to give you a team where their projected or their strength of schedule is a good thing and it's a bad thing. And I understand that there's no Big 12 team in here, but I'll explain that why I've got to that logic. So where it's good in the ACC, that would be Clemson. Clemson had the best SP Plus rankings. They had the most returning roster, both sides of the ball, returning production, recent history, etc. It's all coming up for the Tigers. So they're 34th. They're projected to win 9.3 games. At average top five team in the country would win 88.3% of their games. This is massive for the Tigers because this puts them on that level of we might honestly have to put the Clemson Tigers into a group of the ones I view as playoff locks with Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas. It's getting really close. Like so much is going right for Clemson here. They play in the easier of the conferences. They're not playing Georgia again. Yes, you got to play South Carolina in the non-conference, well, really quality team, but like South Carolina's got a much tougher schedule than you. For example, South Carolina has the seventh hardest schedule in the country. And South Carolina is projected to win 79.5% of its games and 7.2%, 7.2 games. So Clemson's got a decided edge here. They may have one of the harder schedules in the ACC, but like Stanford's is more difficult, and I would say Syracuse. Syracuse is screwed. We'll talk about them here, and that's where it's bad. Yeah, Syracuse has the hardest schedule there in the ACC. An average top five team would win about 82.4% of its games. Syracuse is projected to win 4.7 games. A stark contrast from like the nine they won this past year. Fran Brown's losing a lot, namely Kyle McCord, and it's it's getting a little rough there for Syracuse. Hopefully, it's not a Dino Babers dead count bounce here, but Syracuse is going to be a team that surprised us a little bit last year. Not going to do the same. They'll be fighting for bowl eligibility at this point. So really good for Clemson. Got another break ahead of a big year for them. Again, I feel like I'm going to win with Clemson. I don't like Clemson personally, but if I'm right, then I look smart. And if I'm wrong, well, then Clemson still lost. So that's good for me. I do feel bad for Syracuse here. Moving on to the Big Ten, it's really good for Penn State. Penn State comes in with the number 29th toughest schedule. They're projected to an average top five team would win 86.6% of its games. And Penn State is projected to win what 10.2 games. So right now, like this schedule with what it says, like we're projected to wins, they're one of only two that I think Bill Connelly can safely say is going to make it, along with Ohio State, who's projected to win 10.4. I think as long as you're over 10, you're in. And they've got teams that are like right there on the periphery with above like 9.5 or better. That would be Alabama at 9.6, which I don't necessarily agree with. Georgia at 9.5, Tennessee at 9.5, which we'll talk about in a minute. Oregon at 9.8. You get what I'm saying. Like there's Clemson 9.3. It's close. It's good for Penn State because the schedule is not again going to be. It might be difficult in the sense that like they got to play in the Big Ten, but like I would say of the teams in the Big Ten, I think they have what one, two, three. What? So in the Big Ten, Indiana, Oregon, Nebraska, Michigan, Illinois, and Maryland are have harder schedule or have easier schedules than them. So you're looking at a bottom third schedule in terms of strength of schedule, and you got to deal with people at the top of it that are really screwed, like Wisconsin. Wisconsin is awful. Wisconsin has the fourth hardest schedule in the country. That's where it's bad. Yeah, an average top five team would win 78.6% of the games on Wisconsin's schedule. They're projected to win 5.1 games. Why in God's green earth did you extend or give a raise to Luke Fickell? You guys are so screwed. I am so out of the Badgers. The only team that I think, actually, you know what? I'm going to be straight up with you guys. I think the team that has they have the least amount of hope of any team in the Big Ten because they suck and they're paying somebody a ton of money. At least with Mike Locksley at Maryland, you can move on from him and you can hire somebody else. Like you can go get you can get literally anybody else, man. You've got the Under Armour money if you want to with Kevin Plank. You can get somebody better. With like Luke Fickell and you're paying him all this money, trying to run an air raid offense, you know. Then again, Phil Longo like was a terrible OC and he got the job at Sam Houston. So what do I know? But the other big thing besides Wisconsin being I'm being so down on them, again, I think they're the one that's been hurt the most by divisions going away in the Big Ten. They used to benefit a lot playing in the Big Ten West. I thought it was Iowa, but what you have to remember is Iowa played Penn State pretty frequently in Big Ten play, and Iowa just has a little bit better history. They'll play up a little bit more, and that probably makes some Wisconsinites mad, but I really don't care. The biggest thing with Connolly's graph here is so they have the hardest Big Ten schedule. They're sandwiched between like a bunch of SEC teams. So these next hardest schedule in the Big Ten would be Rutgers coming in at 16. Rutgers is still projected to win 5.8% of its 5.8 games, win 83% of its games for the top five schedule. Like Rutgers has a lot more talent returning than Wisconsin. I think Rutgers is in a far better situation than Wisconsin right now. Northwestern's got some challenging too. So does Purdue, UCLA, USC, and then you kind of get down there with Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan State, Minnesota, Washington. But like, it's I don't think it's an outlier. Like Wisconsin's just dead in the water right now. I'm not expecting anything out of the Badgers. So good for Penn State, bad for Wisconsin. Let's move on to the Big 12. Look, I didn't do a lot of homework here because I didn't really feel like I had to. There's no Big 12 team with a top 40 schedule, top 40 hardest schedule. Maybe they could be 41. At this point, I really don't care. So I just did some deductive reasoning. I think it's good for Arizona State. They're returning so much talent. They've had tremendous success there this past year under Kenny Dillingham. Yes, you lose Cam Scadaboo to the NFL, but Sam Levitt's back. You pretty much return everybody. You still have Marcus Arroyo on your coaching staff. When it comes to Arizona State, I feel that like they're going to remain in the upper quartile of the Big 12. I feel very confident they'll be up there. I feel Iowa State will be up there too. We'll see if BYU stays. I think that they could. I think Colorado is going to pull back considerably, but I think it's bad for teams trying to get in there, like Baylor or Texas Tech. And I picked Texas Tech here. They may have the hardest schedule in the Big 12. They may have the easiest schedule, but I would say if because Cody and I are kind of on the same sort of thing there. We think one of these two schools is going to be really good. He's more leaning towards Baylor. I think he was such a big critic of Dave Aranda, and he was proven wrong this past year. I think he just really likes what Sawyer Robertson does at quarterback in the system for them. And I think eventually all the recruiting that Joey McGuire does in Lubbock is going to pay out. I love seeing Texas Tech beat West Virginia. It's a lot of fun. Particularly towards the end of the year, we're like, God, is Neil Brown actually going to be fired? He is. Now he's on Texas' staff there with Steve Sarkisian. But I think like all things equal, I just think in the playoff era, we've seen Baylor rise to the occasion more than Texas Tech. We've seen Baylor win the Big 12 three times. Texas Tech hasn't come close. So that's where I think it's a challenge for Texas Tech is like my big thing is like with the Big 12 is none of them have really difficult schedules, so it makes it more difficult for teams to get in as, you know, at-large teams because they're going to have to win 11 games. Like they're going to have to like be the equivalent of TCU in 22 to get in without winning the Big 12. They got to basically be undefeated and lose the conference championship to a quality team like a Kansas State team. But again, like Texas Tech does not have the cachet of Arizona State right now, or recently like Baylor has or Kansas State has. So that hurts them. Good for Arizona State, bad for Texas Tech. Moving on to the last one, the SEC. It's good for Tennessee, man. I feel validated here. I feel like for a while there, I ranked them too high. I think I had them like 8 or 9 in my way too early top 25. Uh, Other people did not. Cody didn't have them anywhere close. Think what Mark Schlabach, who I kind of used mine as a reference, like in building mine, he had them down like in the 20s, they're the teens. Well, Tennessee has the 24th hardest schedule in the country. An average top five team would win 85.6% of its games, and they're projected to win 9.5 games with its schedule. My big thing is they have the second easiest schedule in the SEC. The only one that's easier is Missouri. Missouri is supposed to have a good year. They're supposed to win about 8.5 games, if you will. But I think it's like Tennessee. Yeah, you get Georgia at home. That's huge. You got to play Florida, which is gonna be tough. You got to avenge the Arkansas loss, and you got to beat Alabama again. And I think if you win, well, also you don't have NC State on the schedule either. But like, and I also forget where they open up this past year. We'll talk about that here in a second. Tennessee football. Yeah, because I'm finishing the show with something on Tennessee as well. Um, Tennessee football schedule. This is why. Um, Let me see. They open up. Oh yeah, that's right. They play at Yeah, that's right. They play Syracuse in the Benz right down the street. So that's where I was thinking. I had a feeling they might be playing there. Yeah, Syracuse versus Tennessee and Atlanta. I think it's Virginia Tech versus South Carolina. I think that's where the Chick-fil-A or the Aflac kickoff, if you will. But again, this is big for Tennessee because they there's going to be a lot of easy wins on the schedule for the Vols. They don't have the toughest schedule in the SEC. They're gonna have Nico Iamaleava back for 1 year at quarterback. You didn't lose Tim Banks. Your receiving core wasn't that great. Yeah, you lose Dylan Sampson at running back. Yeah, you lose James Pierce Jr. off the edge, but I think there's just better guys in the program or better guys that could emerge potentially. Maybe it's a larger cast of characters here. But I think if you win that game at home versus Georgia, which I think you're probably going to do, it's early and Georgia's still got a new quarterback to figure out, whether that be Gunnar Stockton or Ryan Puglisi, maybe even Ryan Montgomery. Who knows? But Tennessee, like, I look at the schedule, I'm like, are there really any losses on there? There might be, but I would say like the chances of them winning 10 games and getting back are pretty high. So I'm pretty bullish on Tennessee making the playoff next year and taking advantage of its relatively soft schedule. As far as where it's bad, Oklahoma is so screwed. It's the same sort of thing that I said about Wisconsin. They're basically become one of the same here in realignment. These are traditional powers that have made terrible hires and they've doubled down on it with a terrible decision from their athletic director. Oklahoma is tied with Florida for having the hardest schedule in the country. An average top five team would win a projected 77.1% of the games on Oklahoma's schedule. Where I think the difference is Florida is projected to win zero point 0.3 more games than Oklahoma. Oklahoma is projected to win 6.3. So they're projected to go 6.3 and 5.7. For the amount of money you're paying Brent Venables, for how good Oklahoma is historically, that's just so unbelievably unacceptable. Like this is a program that should be winning 9, 10, 11 games every year, and you're winning six. Like, give me a break. And I understand you went out there, you got John Mateer from Washington State, you got Ben Arbuckle to remain his OC coming over from Pullman as well. But you nearly got DeMarco Murray poached by Penn State. I think to replace Jawan Sellers. I think that's his name, the offensive running backs coach that went to Notre Dame, I think. Maybe I'm getting that all wrong. It's a long offseason trying to remember everything. But then you got to play Texas. You got to go to Knoxville. Where that's what I was so out in Oklahoma last year. They got their ass kicked by at home versus Tennessee, and that was where I was like, I'm so out on Jackson Arnold, and I think Tennessee kind of let up towards the end there. So I had some concerns about both teams, and that ultimately I was proven right in the end with the Vols and the Sooners. But Oklahoma, honestly, if they don't push for like a playoff spot, like if they're not winning 8 or 9 games, you not only need to get a new head coach, you need to get a new athletic director. And honestly, I was thinking about this beforehand, and we'll tie this more when I talk about Josh Heupel to finish the show. Why not mend fences? Why not improve in a relationship? Why don't you just bring Danny White and Josh Heupel together for a second time? They were initially at UCF, now they're at Tennessee. Why don't you hire them in tandem and bring them back to Norman? I feel everything that Josh Heupel is doing is exactly what Oklahoma would need to do. I mean, he's an Oklahoma legend. He led them to a national championship. He played quarterback. He came up from the junior college rankings. Heisman runner up back in 2000. Like this is the Oklahoma I'm seeing is not Oklahoma football anymore. It's just something that's just masquerading as it. So I guess I'll recap here about where it's good for in the Power Four for strength of schedule and where it's bad. So in the ACC where it's good, it's Clemson. In the ACC where it's bad, it's Syracuse. And the Big Ten where it's good, it's Penn State. In the Big Ten where it's bad, it's Wisconsin. In the Big 12 where it's good is Arizona State. Where it's bad in the Big 12 is Texas Tech. Where it's good in the SEC is Tennessee. And where it is bad in the SEC is Oklahoma. And right now, I'm going to ask myself a question. We're going to move on to some do Hoss or do Hoss here. Will Lane Kiffin be able to take advantage of Ole Miss's soft schedule and make the playoff this year? Do Hoss, two S's. This, because I think Ole Miss has they have the third easiest schedule in the SEC. They're coming in number 23 nationally with the 23rd toughest, but like Tennessee and Missouri are the only ones behind them. They're projected to win 9.2 games. An average top five team would win 8.56% of their games, same as Tennessee. The biggest issue I have with Lane Kiffin is like he's got to be serious. Last year was the year to do it. You had more talent. While I'm bullish on what Austin Simmons can do at quarterback, you had Jackson Dart, you had Walsh Nolan, you had so many other things going for you. And looking at Ole Miss's schedule, like there's really no excuses for it either. I read about this. So again, everything in the SEC from a year ago flips. So every home game is a road game. You're looking at Ole Miss's schedule, and the only certain loss I feel is probably at Georgia. That's just tough. Georgia's going to be having a revenge game. Whether it'll probably be in their favor, that was probably the worst loss for Georgia this past year, more so than the heartbreaking one versus Alabama being too depleted at the end versus Notre Dame. But yeah, I don't think Ole Miss is going to win between the hedges. But can you win? Are there any other losses on their schedule? So I'm just going to rattle it through real quickly because I have it up. They start the year at home versus Georgia State. That's a win. On the road at Kentucky, even though it's on the road, I think they're going to avenge that loss from a year ago that really kept Ole Miss out of the playoff. They're going to get to 2-0. We'll see what happens with Arkansas at home there in the Nut Bowl on September 13th, but I think they have an advantage there. Got to be cautious about the Tulane Green Wave, not overlook them. Maybe a slip up there, probably not. So you're looking at 4-0. Then you got LSU, a team you lost to in the Magnolia Bowl on the road last year. Let's just say you lose that because Gary Nussmeier is better. But that's a game where Ole Miss is going to be up against, or LSU is going to be up against it. You have the bye. You host Washington State. Should win that game. And then you got back-to-back road games at Georgia, where I think you lose, and at Oklahoma, where I think you need to win. You host South Carolina. They're going to play up, but I think you should be thankful that it's at home for you. I think that's a tough matchup for the Gamecocks. It could go either way. You host the Citadel. Should win that game. Then you host Florida. Need to win that game badly because that's how you lost. That's the other one. That's the one where you lost to Florida in Gainesville that kept Billy Napier his job, kept Ole Miss out of the playoffs. I have a bye, and then you host Mississippi State. So it really comes down to you assume a Georgia loss. And then you're looking at Florida, South Carolina, LSU, maybe Tulane. You got to win 3 of those 4. You beat Tulane. And then it's like you're looking at the other ones. I don't know. I'm higher on LSU and South Carolina this year. Honestly, I'm higher on Florida. You could lose all 3. You could be 8-4. I think Ole Miss is talented enough. I think Lane Kiffin's a good enough coach where you maybe get 1, maybe 2, but that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no excuses. I think the talent's not there. The schedule's there. The talent's not there. So, yeah, but I feel pretty comfortable saying Duhast, 2 S's, they're not going to make the playoff this year. And I guess to really tie a bow on this before I get to the final topic of the show, hasn't run its course with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. I don't know where he's going to go. Honestly, it really wouldn't shock me if Hugh Freeze fails and he goes to Auburn. I think that kind of fits it. Because like I think Bruce Pearl is having such tremendous success in the hardwood. People hate him from what he did at Tennessee. Honestly, people hate Lane Kiffin for what he did at Tennessee. Auburn doesn't have morals. Auburn doesn't care. So just bring him there. And I think that would also be a hire that I think John Cohen would be able to save his job for, going out there on a limb to get Hugh Freeze from Liberty. But why would you leave? Oh, and then you hire, another coach from all this. God. I'm kind of actually rooting for that a little bit too. I think Kiffin's a better fit at Auburn than he would be at Florida. But I think the one place he would actually leave for if it opened up would be Nebraska because he was born in Nebraska. His dad was I think he was born in Omaha. His dad was on his late father, Monty Kiffin, the defensive guru, came up with Tampa 2 back in the NFL for Tony Dungy and everything like that. I think he would potentially entertain going to the Cornhuskers and everything like that. So I think Lane Kiffin's got to kind of show what he can do at this point, and I'm a little dubious about that. But I don't know. I feel like, for lack of a better word, that he really missed his window this past year, and I'm just a little. I wonder if this is as good as it gets for Ole Miss because like they haven't won a national championship since the '60s under Johnny Vaught. Like they've never been to Atlanta since the SEC went to a SEC championship game. They have enough resources, but there's just enough talent in state. There's just enough of division with Mississippi State. Mississippi State sometimes get the guys that Ole Miss has. Like if Mississippi State was competing was in the American and they were competing with Tulane, like as opposed to in the SEC, maybe that would help Ole Miss become LSU. But it's not. It's different. And I don't see it happening this year, but there is a schedule advantage. And I think if Lane Kiffin is as good as a head coach as I think he is, he needs to win about 9 games with this. The schedule might say 8-4. If it's anything worse, that's going to be a disaster. But what's not going to be a disaster here for us is some good bull. We're going to finish the show with that. Good bull. Good on Josh Heupel for being very straightforward about explaining why Tennessee is playing a spring game. Going to look this up real quick. He talked about this on Friday, and he values this. And I'm going to quote. I'm going to read the quote from the Associated Press that was published on ESPN from Josh Heupel. So it's important in particular for our young players to get a taste of what is going on. It is important in particular for our young players to get a taste of what it's going to be like in the fall to play in front of a big crowd stadium. We open up this year on the road. You don't want that to be the first time you played in front of a bunch of people. So that experience, it can create urgency, understanding what it's going to feel like as they finish up spring ball and go into summer. End of the day, we have to accelerate the growth curve. A spring game in those settings is part of accelerating their growth. So it should be noted that the spring game, it's going to be smaller. Neyland Stadium's going under some renovations. Last year, only 10,000 people got to go. This year is going to be about 45,000. That's what they're going to cap it out. Back in 23, it's 58. So, got a frog in my throat. That's what happens when you talk by yourself for 55 minutes. But anyway, the fact that saying like this is an opportunity for you to get better and play in front of a large crowd. Again, they got to open up on the road at Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Syracuse, a team that thrives, that plays all of its home games in a dome. Yes, Tennessee is a much better program right now than Syracuse because Syracuse lost a lot, but they were similar a year ago. Tennessee won 10 regular season games. Syracuse won 9. Tennessee made the playoff. Syracuse was a top 25 team. So I think Josh Heupel's got a lot of respect for what Fran Brown and Ellis Robinson and all them are doing there in upstate New York. But what I want to say is like you're denying your team an opportunity to play in front of a big crowd, play in one of those major college football cathedrals if you don't do a spring game. Again, the fans miss out. He was also saying like this is great for the fans. And on the counter, this is exactly what Brent Venables is not doing in Oklahoma. He's like, well, we're gonna do this. He's like, I'm calling the plays in defense because every year I've been fighting for my job for 30 years. Or you know, we don't want to show too much here. Oh, we're worried about people getting poached from the transfer portal. Oh, Texas isn't doing it, so maybe we shouldn't do it either. It's just a bunch of fear, just a bunch of frivolous nonsense. I think in life, probably the biggest thing I've learned from COVID is you have to try. You can be fearful, and that's okay. You're a human being. There's things out there in the world that scare you. There's scary things out there every day, but you have to put forth a genuine effort every day with what you do, because that's how you develop self-worth, self-respect. That's how other people take you seriously. Yes, I may have long hair. I may look like I should be fronting an Alice in Chains cover band, but like people in this business, people at Fanside know how hard I work. I work my effing ass off here. And I can kind of do what I do because they know how passionate I am about college football, the Atlanta Falcons, NFL, the Atlanta Braves. They know what I'm capable of. I put in the work every single day and twice on Saturday and Sundays. So this is another reason why I'm bullish on Tennessee. Like Heupel's like, okay, we got our teeth kicked in by Ohio State. We had to go play in the horseshoe. They were the eighth seed, we were the ninth seed. We were that close. If we would have beaten Georgia, maybe we go to Atlanta. We didn't. Um, We also lost Arkansas. So you got to deal with those three losses that are sitting in the back of your head. Again, I think there's a limitation to how Josh Heupel coaches with his scheme. I think you eventually it's got to become more pro style. It can't be so air raid centric because the further you go along in the playoff, the more and more likely you're going to be dealing with defensive minded coaches like Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, defensive coordinators like Jim Knowles, who are going to be able to just shut you, Marcus Freeman, shut you down, the Al Goldens of the world, Tom Allen's at Clemson now. Like that's what I'm saying. Like you can't run a gimmicky offense and expect to win four playoff games. Maybe you can do it with three if you get a soft schedule, but you got to take advantage of your soft schedule this year. If you're Tennessee, opening up at Syracuse, taking every game seriously. I love the approach. I love that this is going to be an opportunity for a Nico Iamaleava to play with a lot of confidence. And again, like this is why I have Tennessee as a borderline lock. They don't have much margin for error. If they lose a dumb game to Arkansas or Florida, maybe not Florida, but like if they lose to Arkansas again and they don't beat Georgia at home and they don't have any quality wins, because again, well, I guess Syracuse is replacing NC State, so maybe they've got that non-conference game note. But again, neutral site and whatever, last year they played at Charlotte, this year they played Atlanta. Very similar schedule, but like they got to show that like they can be better than they were a year ago because Tennessee was the third of three SEC teams to get in. South Carolina might be really good. We'll see what happens to Alabama. We know that Texas is going to be solid. Same with Georgia. But I like this out of Heupel. This is a guy that I don't necessarily always agree with everything that he says, but this is one of those instances where I'm like, Tennessee's got the right head coach, and more importantly, Oklahoma does not. This was episode 157 of False Start. You can follow me, John Buhler, on Twitter or the X at Buhler118. You can follow my absent-minded and absent, whatever, co-host Cody Williams at The Sizzle 20. You can follow the show at CFB False Start. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. Give us a 5-star review on Apple. Really helps the show out. Yeah, I know that this is going to be different viewing because it's going to be we're flying solo like a cup here as opposed to tag team it like we normally do. So the banner is going to look different across the bottom here and at the top. Interesting to see how every rose has its torn fits into the thing too. It should be fine. We had longer ones on there like we've done. We do more than shoot hoops and turn left, so it should be able to fit. But yeah, this is the heart of the offseason. Obviously, most of the attention right now in the NFL or the football world is going to be around free agency. Maybe Cody and I will have some sort of tie into that on Thursday's episode. We're really excited about that. We're moving all over the place here in the world, moving on up, moving, doing big things. And this is False Start.